Hello, this is Ukrlife TV with Liudmyla Nemyria, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev. And today we have a special guest. Our guest today is Katz. He is a professor of government and politics in the George Mason University Schar School of Policy and Government and non-residential senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Professor, hello, and thank you so much to be with us today.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me on your program.
Thank you. Professor, we have a tradition, many-year tradition, to speak in December about scenarios, trends, main events which can determine the next year. And what do you think, how new 2024 could look like?
Well, it seems like there are several scenarios that are possible. Obviously, we today have President Zelensky here in Washington, and it's a very different situation than when he was here before. Obviously, it's not clear that the Republicans want to provide additional support to Ukraine. I actually think that they will, that we here in the U.S., we often see these, these showdowns, as we call them, over budget issues. And it appears that, there's going to be no agreement. And then suddenly at the last moment, there's an agreement. And so what I'm hoping is that this is what we're going to see this time, because in fact, I think that, most of the mainstream Republican politicians really do want to support Ukraine, but they want to get something, concessions from President Biden on the border issue. And I think that, President Biden probably, I think actually there's a lot of Democrats that would like him to do more about the border as well. So I am hopeful that we're going to see U.S. aid to Ukraine continue. And also I think what's interesting is just looking at the European press is that a lot of Europeans are talking about how, well, if we can't rely on the U.S., then we have to do more for Ukraine. That's very interesting, I think, development that we have seen. So, I think that 2024, may be a difficult year, but I think that hopefully U.S. support is going to be continuing, and I think that. People talk about, the difficulties on the Western side, but I think the Russian side also has difficulties. And, we see more and more accounts that the real problem is that, they just are letting so many of their own, young men, not even so young, die at the front. They're not even giving them much by way of arms. They're just pushing these people out. And I think at a certain point, this is going to, to undermine the Russian forces, that they're not going to be able to do this indefinitely. They're going to run out of people, and at a certain point, the people who are enforcing this are going to have to be shoved to the front themselves. They're not going to like this, and I have a feeling that they're going to want to protect themselves. So. This struggle, I think, will continue. So I've talked too much there. So
no, it's fine. Professor, do you think that the support of Ukraine from the side of United States of America is about situation on the battlefield in Ukraine, or it is about the whole strategy of USA? Because I think it is quite important to understand here in Ukraine as well, and in Europe as well, and USA as well.
I think it's more about American domestic politics. I think that for I think a lot of Republicans, the real problem is that Biden's support for Ukraine has been successful. that they don't like this because that's not the narrative that they want to. They like the narrative that Biden is weak. We lost Afghanistan. And so the fact that American support for Ukraine has been successful really angers them. And so they, somehow they want to be able to be the ones who somehow show that the Democrats didn't do a good job, but they'll come in at the last minute if they can to do something. So that's part of it. I think another part is simply that there has been a failure, I think, in the United States, certainly, just all along. We don't teach people about international relations. There's very little, memory of the events that led to World War II. And certainly on the American side, there's not, much knowledge of what happened before the U.S. entered the war. And I think that even knowledge of the Cold War is receding. I think that there are those people out there who feel, why should we spend money on Ukraine when we have problems of our own? And there's no real appreciation that, in fact, most of the money that the U.S. devotes to Ukraine is spent in the United States on American munitions, hiring American workers. It's really very sad that they don't understand this. But I think it's really more about domestic politics than anything else.
Professor, I know that there are many discussions in United States of America as well in EU country that the war in Ukraine has reached a settlement. Do you think that it is true? And if it is true, what scenario are possible right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it has. I'm not a military expert, but it sounds like if if positions are static. But the thing is that this is, I think, it's going to be a long war. That this is a situation we may see, continue something like this. But the response is that, oh well, if it's not going to change, then we shouldn't support Ukraine. The thing is that Ukraine's doing everything it can just to maintain that stalemate. If without that support, the Russians aren't going to simply stop. That's the problem. Is that someone like Putin? He's prepared to sacrifice as many of his own people and hope that people will get tired of it and he can achieve what he wants. So now I think that there are those who want to say, well, if the front is not going to change, maybe what we need to have is a ceasefire in place. That would be the reasonable thing to do. And okay, let's even think about that. How long would it last? In other words, I think that the problem is that so long as the Ukrainians themselves want to continue fighting, I think the West would be well advised to support them. Because even if there's a ceasefire, in other words, there'll be a tendency in the West to think, oh, well, the war is now over. But Vladimir Putin is not going to think that he's simply going to use any ceasefire as a chance to beef up his forces and to take advantage of the situation. So, if there is to be, a ceasefire, it has to come with something else. And I think that, there are some people who say, well, the choice that people should offer is that, if there's to be a ceasefire in place, then, Ukraine joins NATO. In other words, that there has to be, there has to be some major concession on Russia's part. And I think that, someone like Putin, who I think exists very much in a bubble, he's only told what he himself wants to hear. he's just not going to appreciate that. I think, someone made a suggestion, and the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, what's her name, Zakharova or whatever, this was something that, for her was just, impossible. But I think that's the kind of offer that would only make sense. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. So, I think, again, it's like it's only if Ukraine itself wants to do anything like this, and I don't think that Ukraine will want to. Also, I think that if in other words, that the sanctions on Russia cannot be lifted until Russia, withdraws from Ukrainian territory. In other words, if there's to be a ceasefire, then the sanctions have to remain. In other words, that Russia isn't going to be treated like a normal country, or at least not by the West. So, I think that the idea of a ceasefire, although it's appealing, I think, to many, it's obviously very problematic, and has to be, if that's what it's going to be, it has to exist as part of something else. We saw, obviously, in the Korean War, which my own father fought in, that ended with a ceasefire, and of course, it's been in place since 1953. And what we've seen is that North Korea has been under sanctions ever since then, and that's the kind of agreement that I would. There is the sort of result of a ceasefire that I would foresee. Some people say, "Oh, well, Russia is not North Korea." I'm not so sure. I think Russia is just a much bigger North Korea, and it seems that its leadership wants to be like North Korea. So there are other possibilities to consider.
Professor, when we worried about the support from the West, from USA, from European countries, we think why Western countries support or must support Ukraine? Does it have their national interests which connected with the support of Ukraine, or no? Because it must be, real understanding in Western country why they support Ukraine. Do you think that this understanding, they have right now this understanding? Because if no, in any moment, that could decide it, sorry, we haven't money, we couldn't support Ukraine, you could decide it what you want and what could you done right now.
Yeah, well, I think that unfortunately there is not a sufficient understanding, I think, in the part of many others. Obviously, I mean, it's the truth of the matter is that Ukraine and Western countries, we have a common interest of I'm so sorry, of preventing Russian expansionism. And from the West, it's actually getting a good deal. Ukrainians are doing the fighting, and Western countries have been paying. So if they don't want to pay, and if Ukrainians can't fight, what do they think is going to happen? In other words, that obviously, there's a possibility of Russia could overrun Ukraine, and then an emboldened Putin, is he going to stop it? He's made it pretty clear that he has ambitions in Eastern Europe. And if he concludes, well, if the Westerners won't even support Ukrainians fighting, why should they fight themselves? In other words, why would they want to go to the bother? In other words, that Ukrainians are used to suffering, Westerners are not. And so, if there's even the least difficulty, Westerners will give in, or at least so he thinks. And I think that there is not an understanding, I think, that if Western support for Ukraine ends and Ukraine unfortunately falls, then there's going to be war between Russia and the West at some point, and that Westerners are going to have to do what Ukrainians did. And I'm not sure that Westerners they don't seem to understand that this is what awaits them. and the casualties will be massive. That it will be, thousands per month. And I think that Putin is basically thinking that they'll just that they won't be able to take it like Russians will take it. I just think that there's just a complete lack of measure. It reminds me of the situation during the Spanish Civil War, before the main World War II began, that Western countries didn't defend the Spanish Republic, and that Hitler and Mussolini supported Franco, and the Western just didn't think it was that much in their interest. And of course, that's what part of what contributed to Germany in particular thinking that they could get away with whatever.
Professor, do you think that Putin will be ready to attack NATO country, for example, Baltic country, for example, next year, before his, election to rise his reputation inside the country or something like that?
I don't think he has to worry about the election.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. I don't think he needs to do that. I think that, in fact, if anything, I think he would wait till after the election. But if he feels that he has won in Ukraine, then why not attack the Baltics? It seems that these would be the easiest countries. There were certainly studies, going back to the 1990s, how that the Baltics really would be very difficult for the West to defend if they were NATO members. And I think that I think it's highly possible. I think that the Russians would like to attack Poland, whom they just hate. And now we have a more reasonable Polish government in place. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more Russian pressure on Poland as well. But yeah, I think the Baltics would be logical because if the West won't defend Ukraine, will they really defend the Baltics? I think Putin would think that maybe they won't.
Professor, do you think that there are very important misunderstanding among Western countries and countries of Global South? Why I ask about this case? Because at the beginning of the war, we here in Ukraine don't want to understand the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, like regional war. We think right now that it is much more wider war, not just a region. It is not just about Russia and Ukraine. But now I think we receive another problem, because if we look for our war like something wider, like a process of misunderstanding or some conflicts among Western countries and Global South countries, and we stay in between. And in that case, it is not a good story as well. That is why, do you think that in reality, Western countries have many difficulties with, or many misunderstandings with countries of Global South, and how it could influence for our war? And do you think that this misunderstanding between Western countries and countries of Global South could, make Putin stronger?
Well, I think it has. I think that the Global South, that they don't want Russia to lose. They're fearful that if Russia loses, then we'll return to the unipolar world and a lot of American pressure on them about democracy or whatever that they don't want to have to, face. They like the idea of a multipolar world. They have this notion that it's somehow a fairer world, even though it's not at all a fairer world. and that they see that China, as economically powerful as it is, it's not yet ready to intervene in places in the third world. That it's only Russia that will do this. And so what I think they're fearful of is that it's very unfortunate for Ukrainians, but that for the global South, why should they support Ukraine? Because they don't even see it about Ukraine. It's about Russia and the West. It's about the global South and the West, and that Russia doesn't pressure them about political or economic reforms, so they're better off with Russia, and so it is really very, very pathetic. And also, they see it as an opportunity to make money. In other words, that they're getting cheap oil. Some of them are trading with Russia. In other words, a lot of Western goods are getting into Russia via Turkey or the United Arab Emirates or Kazakhstan or Armenia or whatever. So they're profiting basically. They're just pursuing some very, very narrow self-interest, and I think there's just a tremendous amount of resentment. Why is the West helping Ukraine when they don't help, say, the Palestinians? That, Russia's occupying Ukraine. Well, Israel's been occupying Palestine. Why doesn't the West do anything about that? So it's like, if one really thinks that occupation is a bad thing, one should oppose it everywhere. And you don't like Israeli occupation of Palestine doesn't mean you like Russian occupation of Ukraine, but it's an excuse essentially to not support Ukraine. And also, I think just what we're seeing is that there's just not an awful lot of knowledge in the global South, even less about Russia and Ukraine, that they don't want to see it as a colonial situation. In fact, we've heard many people say, what Europeans do to Europeans is not colonialism. Now, of course, the Irish would disagree, the Finns would disagree, the Poles, the Ukrainians would disagree. But see, that's the trouble. In other words, if that's colonialism, then the problem is that then they're not special. In other words, that they want to see their experience of Western colonialism, as very, very special and unique and terrible. They don't want to think of Russia as a colonial empire the way that the Europeans were. But of course it is, but this would require them, if they acknowledge that, then they kind of have to change their policy. So they don't acknowledge it. Now, for those who have been supportive of Russia, like the Iranians, for example, they're in a position where that if Russia loses, they lose. They are now in a very bad position. They have tied themselves to the Russians very foolishly, and so their fate is tied with Russia's. But for others, like the Saudis or the Emiratis or whomever, it's I think it's a profit basically. That's what they're after. That they have this notion that it's best to have multiple great powers competing for their influence. In other words, they don't want to side with any one. They want to be able to maneuver among them. So that's what they consider something to their advantage. And I think also that they just don't want to understand. Certainly at the top leadership level, that they're interacting with the top Russian leadership. I mean, this is their knowledge of Russia, and they're treated very well, and sort of the tough guys, who know that if you don't rule with a strong hand, there's going to be chaos. That they stick together. The Americans don't understand this. They just, I'm so sorry, support democracy, but leads to chaos. And so, you know, they see their interest as sticking with the Russians.
Professor, do you think that next year will be the years of big influence of Global South? And if this is true, do you think that this is a good news for Putin, who tried to play his personal game with Global South?
I'm not sure why the Global South would be any more important next year than any other year. The thing about the Global South, with few exceptions, in other words, they're taking advantage of the war in Ukraine, but they're not actively, in other words, most of them are not sending arms to Russia. They're certainly not sending their own soldiers. In other words, that their support for Russia is more passive. They'll buy cheap Russian oil, but that they're not going to take any risks for Russia, in my view. In other words, they're not going to, you know, if it's in trouble, they're not going to do anything to help it. The exceptions, of course, are, you know, Iran, North Korea. Those are the ones who really are helping it, and helping it tremendously. So I don't see that changing. I don't see that. I don't see the Global South as being in a position to do much more than it's doing already.
Trump. Many say that it is a key person for the next year because of election company, because he have possibility to be a president of the USA, and that is why many people in European Union worried about that, about the security, about the NATO, about the future of NATO, and many other things. And as I understand, many people think very are worried as well in USA, how everything will happen, how election will happen, how events will, go in after the election and during the election. What do you think? Is it really a problem that Trump would be president, or it's just, fear of some people which, don't understand much more deep process?
Well, I think he is a problem. There's no way to sugarcoat that. But look, I think he's in a lot of trouble. There's all these court cases against him. Anything could happen. That it's not clear to me that he's really going to be in a position to run. I mean, nothing will. The people who support him, I mean, they don't care. But the thing is that, look, he lost the 2020 election. Why would he win the 2024 election? Now it's possible, but see, the thing is, in 2016, people didn't really know what they were getting. In other words, people could, like, after he was elected, it was like, well, maybe he'll be reasonable, whatever. Of course, he wasn't. But now no one can have any illusions about what he's like. I mean, he really is pretty awful. On the other hand, I mean, we did see when he was president that despite all his, dislike with regard to the Ukrainian leadership, what have you, we did see more American assistance to Ukraine under Trump than under Obama. So he's not totally predictable. I read the John Bolton memoir, his national security advisor. And one of the things is that what struck me is that it's not that Trump particularly liked Putin, but that Trump thought that he had the ability to work with, any dictator. In other words, that this was somehow that he felt this was his ability. Of course, it didn't work out, but that he did regard Russia as a competitor. In other words, he, part of the reason he was so against the German leadership was about the Nord Stream 2, Well, why would you care about that if you weren't worried about Putin? In other words, if he is such good friends with Putin, why wouldn't Nord Stream 2 be a good thing? But for Putin, it was a bad thing. Or for Trump, it was a bad thing. So it's it's not clear exactly how he would behave, and you never know with someone like Trump. In other words, his attitude could change, in a moment. In other words, that does Trump really have any reason to regard Putin as his friend anymore? It doesn't seem like he really does. I think that Trump would come in. He said, he can solve the Ukraine war in a day. Well, obviously he can't. But if he came in with that expectation that, the Ukraine war is only going on because Biden is president. Now Putin will be reasonable now that Trump is president again. Well, Putin won't be reasonable, and if Trump is offended, then who knows how he'll behave? He's So I don't know. In other words, I personally don't think he's going to be elected president. Maybe it's more my hope than anything else, but I don't think he will be. And even if he is, I'm not so sure that U.S. policy will change that dramatically. But now, for example, we had recently a speaker come from Finland to speak at George Mason. And this guy was saying how, the Trump administration were actually good years for Finland, that there was more American support for Finland than ever before.
Very interesting. Very interesting, really.
Yeah, so that Finland did well out of the Trump administration. So now I think the Finns, they really are good at dealing with bizarre people. In other words, that they're used to dealing with the Russians. That they play a poor hand well, and so they're not so concerned about a new Trump. I mean, they don't want it, but I think the dynamics of the Republican Party would be very different if Trump were president. In other words, you wouldn't see this so-called Freedom Caucus as active. In other words, if Trump decided that we're going to support Ukraine under whatever circumstances, he's not going to get any opposition in Congress about this if that's what he decides. So that's one of the different. In other words, what we're seeing, it's when you have a Republican House of Representatives and a Democratic president, the kind of dynamic we have now. If either of those change, then we won't see that.
Professor, this year, from the point of view of people who live just today, we understand that there are many points many countries where situation is very destabilized. What I mean, Russians' war against Ukraine, the war in the Middle East. And many experts say that it is a beginning of Third World War. And that next year we will see, more wars in different regions. Do you think that next year will be a year of, destabilization in different parts of the world? Are you expecting this?
Well, I think that there is a lot of that argument is possible. I think if you look at the lead up both to World War I and World War II, there were a lot of little wars, that were taking place, and then they suddenly kind of merged into a big war. And I think that, same that we're seeing now, it's not just the war in Ukraine, but we're seeing the Middle East conflict, which could expand, into Lebanon easily. We're seeing now, Venezuela is threatening to invade Guyana. I don't think that they would even think about this if nothing else was going on, because that would be the focus of attention. I think that they're thinking about it because they might be able to get away with it, because everyone's focusing on other things. And of course, there's always the Taiwan situation in the South China Sea, with naval incidents between China and the Philippines occurring pretty regularly now. So yeah, there are a lot of problems. Is it possible? Now, obviously, we didn't have nuclear weapons at the beginning of World War I or World War II. And I would hope that this would still be serve as a deterrent. Nevertheless, I think that if not a world war, we're going to see an awful lot of war in the world next year, and that it might well increase.
Professor, many people here in Ukraine think that next year will be crucial for the Russians' war against Ukraine. I agree with that.
Well, it could be crucial. This year could have been crucial.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Could have been crucial.
Yeah.
And I think that at a certain point, I think that Putin's real weak point is the toll on his own troops that this war is taking. That, how long can he simply waste all these lives before there's some reaction, either on the part of the troops themselves. Certainly, we're seeing the wives and mothers. In other words, just like during the Chechen War, we seem to see more activity on the parts of Russia's women who are against the war. And he doesn't like this. So, I think that he's in a desperate situation. That I think he keeps hoping that the West is going to give up and he'll be saved. But things could happen in Russia at any time. And I think the real problem is, at some point, do his own security services, do they decide that the costs are greater than any benefits that they're experiencing, that they're only experiencing costs? Now, I've kind of hoped for this for a while, but it hasn't happened. But I think the longer the war goes on, the riskier it gets for Putin.
And the last question about Russia, because at the beginning, everybody says that we need to stop Russia. But there was different understanding of this process to stop Russia. At the very beginning, many countries say, no, it is important, it is impossible for Russia to lose. Yeah, and everybody thinks that it could, bring many problems for world in general because of nuclear weapons and many other things. But now, this year, it seems for us that Russia have time to strengthen, to recover. And now Russia is ready to continue. And do you think this is a problem in understanding of Russia behavior, in Russia of action, in Russia, in understanding of Russia?
Well, I think that, Russia definitely is ready to continue. But I think it all depends, and obviously they're getting weapons from Iran, from North Korea. Although we read that the quality of the weapons from North Korea is not very good. There's a lot of them blow up in Russian faces. I think, and the point is, how many men are they prepared to lose? And they're prepared to lose a lot, but they've lost a lot already. And the best and the brightest have fled. So it's just, how long can they keep doing that? I think that obviously their economy is stronger than we all would have hoped. They have suppliers, but it's the number of men at a certain point that this is going to be more of a problem. It seems to me. It's not limitless. You can't just do this forever. That I think is his vulnerability.
Professor, thank you so much. Thank you so much to be with us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for having me, and I wish it was under happier circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, and stay with us. It was Ukrlife TV with Liudmyla Nemyria.